very positive in its understanding and approach. I think from that point of view, we can move forward, perhaps reforming our current education system, which will be more critical, inquiry oriented. There are a few questions from the part of the audience to the speakers.
Though in the beginning everything looked very strange to me because too academic and too many names, but towards the end I was extremely happy, especially when D'Souza pointed out that each one will have to first accept that he belongs to a tradition, and then in mutual trust he should be able to also have a sense of suspicion and thereby criticize one's own tradition and come back again with greater enrichment. And all the more I was happy when I was said that friendship is the basis. Now perhaps Aristotle said about friendship in a personal level, but in a national level, the different communities, the different races, if only we can develop that patriotic sense with which we will be able to apply all those four criteria: belonging, trust, suspicion, and then come back to build up a good nation. That would be wonderful. I think I am very much enriched by your interventions.
Thank you, professors, for this enlightening session. While speaking, Professor Ivo was referring to the starting point of hermeneutics to religious traditions and interpretation of religious text. Could you enlighten us a little more in this regard, either Professor D'Souza or Professor Ivo? How this hermeneutics is related to religious interpretation, religious text, and philosophical interpretation?
Maybe I could begin. From what I am aware, a person called Philo of Alexandria, a Jewish person, was the first one to talk about allegoresis, the theory of allegory, and he was studying the Jewish biblical texts. He borrowed that theory from a group of philosophers called the Stoics, and he was the one who said when there are obscure passages, we must search not for the meaning that is most obvious, but for a meaning that is hidden. We have to go behind the text to find the hidden meaning, which would be the real meaning. This theory itself was taken up by a Christian person called Origen, who is considered one of the great theologians of the early church, and he called it the theory of typology. And there he would say things that the Old Testament say in a hidden way are made more manifest in the New Testament. But I think that same process of allegory is to be found in the process of interpreting religious texts anywhere in the world. In our own country, for example, we will have texts about Krishna and the gopis, and a person interpreting them will ask, but what does that mean? Is it just a relationship between a man and a woman, or is there a deeper spiritual meaning to it? And that would be an example of how allegoresis is present also in texts like, let's say, of an Indian religion.
I would like to complement what Dr. Coelho has said. When you are reading especially a religious text as a believer, a religious text generally is very beautiful, literally rich, and something that it is profitably to pray with. But when you are looking at a religious text as a scholar, one must employ a little distanciation. What Ricoeur uses, distanciation. Without that distanciation, you will not be able to look critically at a text and to see where it is coming from, whether the values that the text have been created by are still values that we can uphold today. And here is where different forms of discrimination might also be in religious texts. Now, that is not to say that we must do away with religious texts, but how do we make sense of them today? How can we focus on the positive and understand that the negative dimensions of those texts had a past historical basis which may not be our basis today? So we can understand that and focus more on the positive, healthy aspects of religious texts. And here's where scholarship could perhaps help. Good scholarship will use good exegetical methods, good historical critical methods.
So my
People, I am Tadeusz, coming from Kotagiri, philosophy teacher. The issue of introducing philosophy to this curriculum also to enhance the students, the future students, for critical analysis and so on. Even in our circle, certain times there is a criticism of philosophy is mere mental celebration. In that case, critical hermeneutics, how will it help the students, maybe after BA and MA philosophy and so on, how will they be helped to reread the ethos of time, cultural milieu? Perhaps we have also pseudo communications in either fields like theatre, art and literature and so on. The students of BA and MA philosophy, what would be they made to work at it? Perhaps what will be the contribution after the studies?
Perhaps one thing that comes to my mind is that we help our students become aware of their own situatedness, their own culture, their own history, their own personal history and geography. That would be very much part of understanding or self-knowledge, and becoming aware of ourselves, bringing our historicity to light, which is an endless task in many ways. This is itself a critical task. The more I become aware, the less I will be governed by perhaps negative factors in my own historicity and situatedness. So that would certainly be one very important task for our students, becoming aware of themselves and of their own historicity.
I would like to add, not only education, especially distance learning, can bring in dimensions which may not be there in a closed system, in a system where the teacher gives the answers to the students. Schleiermacher spoke about becoming aware of the original, the inspiration, according to which a text has been formulated. So a critical student will ask, who has written this text? Whatever text it has, whatever text I am reading, where is it coming from? Dilthey will ask, what are the historical conditions that have led to the construction of this text? Heidegger will ask, how can I make this text a part of my being rather than only study for the exam? How can I assimilate and appropriate this text, make it part of my life? Gadamer will say, how can I appreciate the traditional background and effort that have gone into the construction of these texts, so we can be more appreciative of different texts that come from different traditions. Ricoeur and Habermas will pay more importance to specifically the critical dimension, to raise questions like, what are the strengths of this text? What are the weaknesses of this text? How does this text compare to other texts?
That is, from quantity to quality. It takes place almost in the postmodern era. There is also a person I learned some times back who was having a meaning, man searching for meaning in the dungeon, the prison. Now, what is the criteria of the concept of meaning? How shall we inculcate in the mind of students, particularly in the IGNOU level?
If I understand you right, you are referring to Viktor Frankl's famous book, Man's Search for Meaning. There he would be asking perhaps a more specific question. The question, do you have a reason for which to live, a reason for which to die? And he was trying to say that people survived in the concentration camp only if they had a powerful reason for living. That would be perhaps part of what we are talking about, but then again it might be slightly different also.
I think if I may add to what has been asking about the meaning, to a certain extent meaning is also transmitted to each one of us by our own religious tradition or social tradition, or political tradition or economic tradition. We all have meaningfulness to live by. Now, having shared that transmitted meaningfulness, one also goes through the process of discovering it for himself or herself. I think when that integration takes place in the right proportion, I think that makes sense for the person to go this way or that way, to accept this position or that position. I think ultimately it is a personalized choice one has to make. Of course, keeping in mind the larger social context, one has to probably align with the social requirement and social needs of the day. I think this healthy tension will always continue between the personalized as well as the social requirements.
what do
Yes.
you suggest can be done for the practical application of philosophy to the solution of some of the students and youth problems that we face in India today? The gap is there, and I think it should be addressed. What do you suggest can be done?
Maybe I should add something that we have not highlighted enough in the discussion today, and that is that there is a group process also. If any single one of us can approach truth in a small way, 5 of us sitting together in an atmosphere of friendship, in an atmosphere of peace, can come to a better chance of approaching understanding and truth.
We have had a very lively discussion on the very interesting topic of hermeneutics, how this applies to historical texts, to religious texts, and many other texts that we are familiar with. And we all try to understand the meaning that is there, the hidden meaning, and how we can understand the mind of the author, how we can appropriate the meaning, etc., from the point of view of a number of thinkers, both Western and Indian. And I want to wholeheartedly thank both participants of today's discussion, Dr. Keith D'Souza as well as Dr. Ivan Coelho, who have been very, shall I say, erudite in the presentation of their views. And I'm sure all of us have benefited from their sharing, their insights, their learning, and so on. I think we must continue this process of learning with a critical view, with a critical inquiry, with a critical mind, so that we can unravel the mysteries of truth that are presented to us every day in different forms. Thank you very much for participating in this. Thank you very much.
as much as clinically feasible. Slight deviations from parallelism, approximately 10 to 15 degrees, can be taken up by the attachment mechanisms. However,